Hello, last day of Mice and Men for this week. We are on day 10. Continuing, we've got all the men off going to check and see what's going on with Slim and Curly to see if there's going to be a fight. But George and Lenny have stayed behind. Also, if you remember, Candy has stayed behind because his dog was just shot and he's just not in a great mood at the moment. Our lesson for today, readers take special note of places where characters consider their own mortality. How characters think or feel about their life and death can give reader clues about themes within a novel. So this is tricky because mortality means thinking about your death. And typically we don't walk around talking about when we're going to die. But when we make plans, there's kind of an unspoken back half of the sentence. So if your plan is you want to go to college and you want to get a degree and you want to get a job, you want to do those things before you die. Okay, even if you don't want to go to college, but you want to graduate and get a job, have a family, whatever it is you want to do, it's before you die. We don't say that. We don't say, I want to buy a house before I die. We say, I want to buy a house. Because it's a little bit morbid to always say before I die, but that is truly what we mean. So what we're going to be looking at today is the plans that George and Lenny are making. Again, we're going to talk more about that ranch that they want to have someday, and those are the plans they hope to have before they die. Those are their life dreams. So they might not directly mention their death, but they are thinking about what it is they want out of their life, which is the same idea. Okay, so we are starting at the bottom of page 54, where we just had all the men leave, and then again, we only have George, Lenny, and Candy left in the room. Okay, so you can go ahead and follow along with me if you would like. When Whit and Carlson were gone, and the door closed after them, George turned to Lenny. What you got on your mind? I ain't done nothing, George. Slim says I better not pet them pups so much for a while. Slim says it ain't good for them. So I come right in. I've been good, George. I could have told you that, said George. Well, I wasn't hurting him none. I just had mine in my lap petting it. George asked, Did you see Slim out in the barn? Sure I did. He told me I better not pet that pup no more. Did you see that girl? You mean Curly's girl? Yeah. Did she come in the barn? No. Anyways, I never seen her. You never seen Slim talking to her? Uh-uh. She ain't been in the barn. Okay, said George. I guess them guys ain't gonna see no fight. If there's any fighting, Lenny, you keep out of it. I don't want no fights, said Lenny. He got up from his bunk and sat down at the table across from George. Almost automatically, George shuffled the cards and laid out his solitaire hand. He used a deliberate, thoughtful slowness. Lenny reached for a face card and studied it, then turned it upside down and studied it. Both ends the same, he said. George, why is it both ends the same? I don't know, said George. That's just the way they make 'em. What was Slim doing in the barn when you seen him? Slim? Sure, you seen him in the barn and he told you not to pet the pup so much. Oh, yeah. He had a can of tar and a paintbrush. I don't know what for. You sure that girl didn't come in like she come in here today? No, she never come. George sighed. Oh, you give me a good whorehouse every time, he said. A guy couldn't go in, get drunk, and get everything out of his system all at once and no messes. He knows how much it's going to set him back. These here jailbaits is just set on the trigger of the hoose grow. Lenny followed his words admiringly and moved his lips a little to keep up. George continued. You remember Andy Cushman, Lenny? Went to grammar school? The one that his old lady used to make hotcakes for the kids? Lenny asked. Yeah, that's the one. You can remember anything if there's anything to eat in it. George looked carefully at the solitaire hand. He put an ace up on his scoring rack and piled a 2, 3, and 4 of diamonds on it. Andy's in San Quentin right now on account of a tart, said George. Lenny drummed on the table with his fingers. George? Huh? George, how long it's going to be till we get that little place and live on the fat of the land? And rabbits? I don't know, said George. We got to get a big steak together. I know a little place we can get cheap, but they ain't giving it away. Okay, so we see George ask Lenny if Curly's wife has showed up to the barn because he wants to know if there's actually going to be some sort of fight out there or not. And as far as Lenny remembers, no, she was not there. So Curly and Slim shouldn't have anything to fight over. Shouldn't, but we'll see how that plays out later. And then he starts talking about some person they knew in the past that's in jail for something a woman did. You know, it's the woman's fault, as they have established in this book. They seem to put it on the woman. We don't know what happened. Maybe it was. We're unsure. And then Lenny comes back to the rabbits because Lenny loves the rabbits. So we're getting into them talking a little bit about the ranch. So that's our first quote. Does say, George, how long it's going to be till we get that little place and live off the fat of the land and rabbits. So Lenny wants to talk about their dream that they're going to have, hopefully, before they die. Again, talking about what they want out of life is similar to talking about your own death. Okay, so continuing on, we're going to learn a little bit more about this dream and how practical it may or may not be. Old Candy turned slowly over. His eyes were wide open. He watched George carefully. Lenny said, "Tell about that place, George." "I just told you just last night." "Go on, tell again, George." "Well, it's 10 acres, said George. Got a little windmill, got a little shack on it and a chicken run, got a kitchen, orchard, cherries, apples, peaches, cots, nuts, got a few berries. There's a place for alfalfa and plenty water to flood it. There's a pig pen. And rabbits, George." "No place for rabbits now, but I could easy build a few hutches and you could feed alfalfa to the rabbits." "Damn right I could," said Lenny. "You goddamn right I could." George's hand stopped working with the cards. His voice was growing warmer. "And we could have a few pigs. I could build a smokehouse like the one Grandpa had. And when we kill a pig, we can smoke the bacon and the hams and make sausage and all like that. And when the salmon run upriver, we could catch 100 of them and salt them down or smoke them. We could have them for breakfast. They ain't nothing so nice as smoked salmon. When the fruit come in, we could can it, and tomatoes. They're easy to can. Every Sunday we'd kill a chicken or a rabbit. Maybe we'd have a cow or a goat, and the cream is so goddamn thick you gotta cut it with a knife and take it out with a spoon." Lenny watched him with wide eyes, and Old Candy watched him too. Lenny said softly, "We could live off the fat of the land." "Sure," said George. "All kinds of vegetables in the garden, and if we want a little whiskey, we can sell a few eggs or something, or some milk. We'd just live there. We'd belong there. There wouldn't be no more running around the country getting fed by a Jap cook. No, sir, we'd have our own place where we belonged and not sleep in no bunkhouse." "Tell about the house, George," Lenny begged. "Sure. We'd have a little house and a room to ourselves, little fat iron stove, and in the winter we'd keep a fire going in it. It ain't enough land so we'd have to work too hard, maybe 6, 7 hours a day. We wouldn't have to buck no barley 11 hours a day, and when we put in a crop, why, we'd be there to take the crop up. We'd know what came of our planting." "And rabbits," Lenny said eagerly. "And I'd take care of them. Tell how I'd do that, George." "Sure. You'd go out in the alfalfa patch, and you'd have a sack. You'd fill up the sack and bring it in and put it in their rabbit cages. They'd nibble and they'd nibble," said Lenny. "The way they do, I seen them." "Every 6 weeks or so," George continued, "them does would throw a litter, so we'd have plenty of rabbits to eat and to sell. And we'd keep a few pigeons to go flying around the windmill like they done when I was a kid." He looked raptly at the wall over Lenny's heads, "and it'd be our own. And nobody could can us. If we don't like a guy, we can say, 'Get the hell out,' and by God, he's got to do it. And if a friend come along, why, we'd have an extra bunk and we'd say, 'Why don't you spend the night?' And by God, he would. We'd have a setter dog and a couple striped cats, but you gotta watch out them cats don't get the little rabbits." Lenny breathed hard. "You just let 'em try to get the rabbits. I'll break their goddamn necks. I'll smash 'em with a stick." He subsided, grumbling to himself, threatening the future cats which might dare to disturb the future rabbits. George sat entranced with his own picture. When Candy spoke, they both jumped as though they'd been caught doing something reprehensible. Candy said, "You know where it's a place like that?" George was on guard immediately. "Suppose I do," he said. "What's that to you?" "You don't need to tell me where it's at. Might be any place." "Sure," said George. "That's right. You wouldn't find it in 100 years. Candy went on excitedly. "How much they want for a place like that?" George watched him suspiciously. "Well, I could get it for $600. The old people that owns it is flat bust, and the old lady needs an operation. Say, what's it to you? You got nothing to do with us." Candy said, "I ain't much good with only one hand. I lost my hand right here on this ranch. That's why they give me a job swamping. And they give me $250 because I lost my hand. And I got 50 more saved up right in the bank right now. That's 300, and I got 50 more coming the end of the month. Tell you what." He leaned forward eagerly. "Suppose I went in with you guys. That's $350 I'd put in. I ain't much good, but I could cook and tend the chickens and hoe the garden some. How'd that be?" George half closed his eyes. "I gotta think about that. We was always gonna do it by ourselves." Candy interrupted him. "I'd make a will and leave my share to you guys in case I kick off, 'cause I ain't got no relatives or nothing. You guys got any money? Maybe we could do it right now." George spat on the floor disgustedly. "We got $10 between us." Then he said thoughtfully, "Look, if me and Lenny work a month and don't spend nothing, we'll have $100. That'd be $450. I bet we could swing her for that. Then you and Lenny could go get her started, and I'd get a job and make up the rest, and you could sell eggs and stuff like that." They fell into a silence. They looked at one another, amazed. This thing they had never really believed in was coming true. George said reverently, "Jesus Christ, I bet we could swing her." His eyes were full of wonder. "I bet we could swing her," he repeated softly. Candy sat on the edge of his bunk. He scratched the stump of his wrist nervously. "I got hurt 4 years ago," he said. "They'll can me pretty soon. Just as soon as I can't swamp out no bunkhouses, they'll put me on the county. Maybe if I give you guys my money, you'll let me hoe in the garden even after I ain't no good at it. And I'll wash dishes and little chicken stuff like that. But I'll be on our own place, and I'll be let to work on our own place," he said miserably. "You seen what they done to my dog tonight? They says he wasn't no good to himself nor anybody else. When they can me here, I wish somebody'd shoot me. But they won't do nothing like that. I won't have no place to go, and I can't get no more jobs. I'll have $30 more coming time you guys is ready to quit." George stood up. "We'll do her," he said. "We'll fix up that little old place, and we'll go live there." He sat down again. They all sat still, all bemused by the beauty of the thing. Each mind was popped into the future when this lovely thing should come about. So they didn't really think about the fact that Candy was laying there on the bunk, and he heard everything they said. And Candy wants to go with them. And we have George, we'd have our own place where we belonged and not have to sleep in no bunkhouse. So George dreams of a better life. That's what he wants before he dies. But Candy is older than them, and he really is thinking about his death. He's thinking about when he can't work anymore. They let him stay at the ranch because whatever happened, he lost his hand at the ranch. And they paid him money, so something must not have been his fault. And he says, when he can't work anymore, he won't have a place to stay. He's been traveling around to different ranches, just like George and Lenny have. So when these men get older and they can no longer work, they don't have a home to go back to. They've never had a traditional home, these migrant workers. And Candy's starting to think about that. And he's starting to get worried and be lonely. And he says, I hope when I can't work that somebody would shoot me like we shot my dog when its life wasn't worth living, but that's not what we do. So he says, maybe if I help you guys get this place, you'll let me stay there until I die. And even if all I can do is wash the dishes or, rake a little bit. But now their dream that seemed like far off and totally not possible seems like it might actually be possible within the next month. So that's very soon. So we've definitely taken a turn for the positive in our story, and we'll have to see how that turns out, if they can make this work, if they can keep moving down this path or not. So if you're watching this on the days that we're doing it in class, it is Friday. This is our last video for the week. As a reminder, next Wednesday is when there will be a vocabulary quiz, and you're supposed to have your vocabulary activities done. And then next Friday will be a reading quiz. No need to study for that. That's just going to be you reading passages and answering multiple choice questions. That's partially why you've been doing some of those for your warm-up, to practice some of those most missed questions from our first reading assignment. It is for a quiz grade this time, so make sure you try your best, but there's nothing that you need to study for it. Okay, have a great weekend, everybody.